Thanks again. So for today, with that, we have Nick Weber from the NIH Center for Information Technology, the Office of Scientific Computing, Cloud Services. We also have Todd Reilly from the STRIDES Cloud Engagement and Enablement team. And again, we also will get to hear from Jan Cheetham, the Director of Research in Cyberinfrastructure at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So with that, I'm going to hand off this shared screen to Todd. Todd, why don't you go ahead and take over?
All right, and I'll let Nick get us started while I do this.
Oh, great.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it, Justin. Appreciate it, Tobin. My name is Nick Weber. I lead the STRIDES Initiative here at NIH, and I also serve as the acting director for our Office of Scientific Computing Services, under which there are cloud, high-performance computing, and scientific application services groups. So we're really excited to talk with you all today, folks in the research, computing, and data domains. We actually had a connection from another colleague in maybe a similar interest group called the Cloud Forum. Bob Flynn, you may know him from Indiana University previously and now Internet 2. And he recommended that we talk with this group to share a little bit more about what the STRIDES Initiative is, how it works, answer any questions that you all may have, and hopefully begin a dialogue that I think we can extend over time. So we're really excited to be here today, and I want to make sure you all know you can interrupt us with questions. We'll be monitoring the chat. We have another colleague on the call, Dr. Philip Meacham, who will also be helping to answer questions in the chat. And our client services kind of front-facing lead, Dr. Todd Reilly, will be taking the majority of the presentation. So again, appreciate the opportunity. You'll want to engage with folks in the community and understand how cloud could potentially be beneficial to the work that you all do, and especially want to understand if there are barriers that you perceive or that exist at your institution. We'd love to know about those and understand how we might be able to help lower those barriers. So some of the questions at the end, you'll see we may have some discussion topics where we're interested in hearing from you all, in addition to answering any questions you all have. So with that, let me turn it back to Todd. And again, thanks one more time for including us in your meeting today.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. And I just want to make sure I switched over to presentation mode. Y'all are seeing like the slides and not the presentation side of this, correct?
Correct.
Okay, very good. I'm also vaguely waving my mouse around, and I'm never quite sure whether anyone on the other end can see that or not, but it's not important. I just want to point out that, we kind of start and end with some information about how to, the STRIDES website at cloud.nih.gov and our email distribution list, strides@nih.gov, so that you can find ways to get in touch with us. And I think that probably, if you take nothing else away from this discussion, that's where what we're looking for is ways to engage with the research communities and better understand sort of your expectations, your barriers, your needs for cloud computing specifically. And so do it that way. And so STRIDES is an effort by the NIH, and it's sort of part of the NIH data science strategy to help move NIH-supported research, biomedical research, to the cloud where appropriate. And we recognize that for many, though not all, that transition is potentially problematic simply by lack of experience. And so, being able to set up acquisition vehicles to purchase cloud services, figuring out how to budget for doing your computation in the cloud as opposed to using on-premises resources is challenging. Learning the new sort of approaches to piecing together your workflows in the cloud as opposed to on-prem can be daunting. And so what we're looking to do is find ways to help the research communities to do this. And I think, and the cartoon on the right suggests we want to do everything that we were doing before in new and better ways. And that's kind of only partly true, right? The impetus for STRIDES comes from the fact that, we see great benefit to the research communities as a whole as we move to the move to the cloud, in terms of being able to access data and access tools, especially newer, better, faster tools for computation in the cloud. But it also provides broader access and participation in the scientific process as more and more people can access this community, access the cloud, and get access to data and platforms. And then I think ultimately, if done properly, and especially because of the way STRIDES is set up, it provides opportunities for cost savings. Cost savings at the individual level may not look like much, but at the level of the NIH, it makes a big difference. The NIH move forward with STRIDES. Technically, this is the Science and Technology Research Infrastructure for Discovery, Experimentation, and Sustainability Initiative. And basically what that means is we want to make it easier, faster, cheaper for folks to move to the cloud when it makes sense for them to move in that direction, right? And so we're looking to democratize access to resources and access to data. We're looking to realize cost savings and efficiencies on behalf of the research communities and on behalf of the NIH. And we're looking to leverage the partnerships that the NIH has forged with our cloud service provider partners. And you'll hear me refer to them as CSPs, cloud service provider partners. And those right now are AWS, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure. So it's worth taking a minute to think about how NIH is structured so we can sort of process how STRIDES functions. So the NIH is made up of a federation of 27 institutes, centers, and offices, abbreviated ICOs, and then probably often further abbreviated by me as ICs, and then also the Office of the Director. And so these ICs that you see sort of in the darker blue have an extramural funding authority. Most, if not all of these, well, not all of them, but most of these also have an intramural research program. Scientists that work for the NIH at the NIH conducting research. And then each of them has their infrastructure to support that research. But there are also offices like NIGMS, where they only have an extramural program. And then there are a handful, and I will call your attention to CIT. This is where STRIDES lives. STRIDES lives within the Center for Information Technology at the NIH, and we do not have an extramural funding authority. And so that distinction is important for how we, STRIDES, interact with the extramural community. All the institutions, universities, academic centers, hospitals, and sometimes even businesses and corporations who receive funding from the NIH to conduct research. CIT specifically is infrastructure support to the NIH, to the intramural community. STRIDES has a very unique role at the NIH in that we serve both the NIH intramural community and the extramurally funded investigators. And so as we talk, I'll make some points about why this divide between intramural and extramural and the fact that we do not have an extramural funding authority impacts how we can interact with you. And most of our interactions tend to be alongside a funding agency as opposed to directly. So when we talk about STRIDES, we talk a lot about what STRIDES is and what isn't. It's important to understand that STRIDES is not a destination. We don't provide broadly infrastructure, especially on the extramural side, for cloud computing. It is not a place to access data in and of itself. STRIDES is a framework through which the NIH and NIH-funded investigators can access favorable pricing for cloud services, right? The NIH, in an effort at essentially collective bargaining, has entered into agreements with AWS, with Google, and with Microsoft to provide access to their cloud services at reduced costs. STRIDES is not the only way you can get to the cloud. Your institution by all means can forge their own agreements with Google, with Microsoft, with AWS to purchase cloud services. But we are looking to provide discounts through the essentially bulk buying power of the NIH. And lastly, it's important to note there's no requirement that you or your institution should use STRIDES to acquire cloud services. If you are able to negotiate better deals, that's great. We think that STRIDES has more to offer than just these discounts. And I'll talk a little bit about that. When we talk about what STRIDES has achieved, I mentioned the cost savings to date, and STRIDES, the STRIDES initiative started in late 2018. So we're effectively 4+ years down the road. And in aggregate, through these agreements with cloud service providers, through the discounts that we are able to provide to NIH-funded investigators intramurally and extramurally, and other parts of these agreements, we've saved the NIH over $52 million to this point. There are well over 200 petabytes of data that are stored using accounts through the STRIDES initiative. Again, STRIDES doesn't own or house these data. We work with the groups that do, and I'll talk a little bit about one of those. But in addition to the cost savings, in addition to the competitive pricing, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of workforce development. I'm going to talk a little bit about professional services that one can acquire from our CSP partners. And I'm going to talk repeatedly about communication, right, and engagement. And so as we go forward, there are several ways that an individual researcher or an institution might already be interacting with STRIDES. For example, the NCBI, which is part of the National Library of Medicine, houses the Sequence Read Archive. And they were one of the first large NIH programs to take advantage of STRIDES. And as soon as STRIDES launched, they began working to move 75 petabytes of public and controlled access data into the cloud in duplicate on both AWS and GCP. So when you think about the 200+ petabytes of data that are maintained through STRIDES right now, 75 petabytes twice is 150 petabytes of that. That's just SRA. This is a cloud resource. This is a data resource that thousands of researchers take advantage of at any given time. And so STRIDES helped SRA to move that data to the cloud, and is saving the NIH considerable money in doing so. In addition, there are a bunch of NIH-funded institutions that have entered into these agreements for STRIDES pricing. And I show a bunch of them here. I also show them because one of the folks on the STRIDES team spent an inordinate amount of time making this slide, and frankly, it looks really good. This is not every institution that participates, but this is many of them. And these are the ones that we got permission to use their logos and things. So SRA data, those are individual researchers simply using data that are housed through STRIDES. This slide talks about getting STRIDES pricing for your institution, and I'll give you directions on how we do that. And then lastly, there are a number of large programs like SRA that also are using STRIDES to house data, to house computational platforms and resources for researchers to come to do computation, to use data. You can, if you have your own cloud account, then you might take advantage of STRIDES discounts while you do your computation. For some of these, the program itself funds the computational time and resources that an individual researcher might use, and that's done through STRIDES. So here's NHLBI, NCI, NHGRI. These are many of the programs. There's another one that's interesting that I actually have a slide for in the backup, and that is the IDEA network through the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, and they are funding, as opposed to sort of at a individual institutional level, they're funding through this idea network regions and looking at building infrastructure, figuring out how we might build infrastructure to support multiple states, multiple schools at a regional level with infrastructure, with STRIDES discounts, and with some of the training that I'll talk about just a little bit. I forgot to mention some of the platforms at the bottom of that slide, but there's things like Anvil, Versera, which used to be Seven Bridges Genomics, and I'm probably missing some of those. At any rate, when you look across the various programs, individual researchers, institutions that are supported by STRIDES, there are a lot of different research domains. And this is where my group in particular, this engagement and enablement team, we are looking to learn more and start to try to build communities around these various research domains that are supported by STRIDES so that we can help you share best practices, share data, share resources, share ideas and approaches, and try to bring more innovation to the science. So what are the benefits of STRIDES? We kind of talked a little bit about this. Certainly favorable pricing, and it always starts with the pricing, but I think the big one here is the support and collaboration. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can get support from cloud service providers. You can reach out to STRIDES and we can help in certain cases with, with different aspects of how you are conducting your research and ways that we can help support that. But we can also bring in our cloud service provider partners and their expertise to help as well. Those CSPs provide information to you as a STRIDES participant that can help in some of the financial management of your accounts. And then, there's access to opportunities for training, workshops, workforce development. And then lastly, but not least, is ensuring that you are following your institution's best practices for launching in the cloud, for utilization of cloud, and following community best practices for financial risk management and for security risk management overall. And so some of the ways that we do that are directly through our cloud service provider partners. And so the cloud service providers have technical account managers. When we think about our extramural research community, there are over 27,000 funded investigators, and I have a team of 5. So we can't meet with all of you individually, but our cloud service provider partners are set up. And here's where you have to accept, people get anxious when we start bringing, or can get anxious when we start bringing vendors into the conversation, because everybody wants to sell you something. And I get that, but they are set up to support. They are set up to provide technical support. And they have very talented, very smart biomedical data science familiar people ready to help you solve your problems around building architecture, building infrastructure, building workflows to support biomedical data science. And we can help you take advantage of those. And that includes this, subject matter expertise. And then if problems rise to levels where infrastructure needs to be built, code needs to be written, you can purchase professional services through those cloud service provider partners. Our deals, our agreements with each of them are structured differently. And so some of these things are widely available. Some of them include, for example, I didn't mean to click through, discounts on those, on the purchase of professional services, but not all of them do. In addition, AWS, our agreement includes enterprise support to our extramural participants. That's not true for Google Cloud and Microsoft. And we can provide much more information about all these. STRIDES has been fortunate over the past couple of years, several years, to provide training at no cost. That is a benefit that is going to phase out. That's not something that that NIH can sustain or sustainably support. However, I will point you to the STRIDES training calendar, and the link is here at the bottom. We, at least through the end of this fiscal year, which ends in September, are providing training to the NIH intramural community, not all of those courses fill. And so when there are vacancies, and when we are able to build a list of extramural researchers who would like to attend, we will fill those extramural researchers into those vacancies when those courses go. So if you're interested, go take a look at that calendar. You can email our training DL and get on these lists and have the possibility of access to free training through that, at least through the end of this fiscal year. But one can also purchase instructor-led training, on-demand training, and other things through STRIDES and through our cloud service provider partners. We recognize that building that workforce is a critical need for enabling cloud-based biomedical data science. And then a last training piece that I'll talk about is the Cloud Lab. And so despite our best efforts over the past several years, and what we've learned talking to individual researchers is often they need something that looks like a sandbox, right? Sandbox has a very specific meaning in the IT world, and we tend to shy away from that. But it's a place where you can go and safely test things out without accidentally racking up tens of thousands of dollars in charges with bad code or things like this. And so NIH put together in collaboration with our partners at all three CSPs, although right now we are waiting for Azure to sort of catch up to the other two. A 90-day pilot program that, again, right now is at no cost. I don't know that we will be able to provide this for free forever, but we're looking to launch over the next several months some beta testing that includes access at no cost to extramural researchers, as well as some accompanying tutorials and tools and other things. And so if you're interested, there's a link here, and you can get on that waiting list for the beta testing. In addition, and I suppose along with, there are links here to GitHub repositories that provide a look into the documentation, to the tutorials, and to the other things that come with this Cloud Lab. And this is something that the STRIDES team has been working over the past 9 to 12 months to develop and populate and put out there for these communities. So when I say, how do I get started with STRIDES? Again, we talked about there are a lot of ways that you can interact with STRIDES. If your institution wants to get access to STRIDES discounts for cloud services, then obviously you're going to need to select a CSP. Some institutions select one and only one, others have multiple platforms, and that's perfectly fine. You get to choose. In order to have access to those discounts, you have to establish a vendor relationship with the CSPs of your choice. That process differs based on the CSP, and sometimes it differs based on the institution. And so this can take time, depending on what level of review has to happen to establish that, a pathway that allows the CSP to invoice the institution for cloud services. However, this is something that has, depending on at the level at which this agreement is established, it happens only once, right? And that covers all the researchers that are under the confines of the organization. That can be a department, it can be a college, it can be a university as a whole, it can be a system. Everyone under the level of the agreement is then eligible to have provisioned for them a STRIDES billing account. We strongly encourage, as you get launched in the cloud, that you talk to your research computing colleagues and your institutional central IT to make sure that you are complying with their requirements for security risk management, and that you're familiar with the best practices for financial risk management as well. When you're ready for this, you can reach out to our cloud service provider partners. Again, this is where we lean on them quite a bit to help us go through the process of establishing these relationships. And their email addresses are listed here. And ultimately, then that will allow you to establish your cloud account and start receiving Strides discounts specifically. I'm going to finish with, and I know in the version of these slides that I sent just this morning to Justin, there was another link here to a bookings site. I removed that. I don't recommend you use that to try to get in touch with us, simply because I don't know for how much longer it's going to be there. Our website is cloud.nih.gov. You can reach out to us at strides@nih.gov, and we are eager to interact. We want to know, we recognize that if you at an institution, at a university, are looking to get access to Strides discounts, there are a bunch of people that have to be in that conversation. And it might include your central IT, it might include research administration, it might include someone in your grants management office. We don't know how that works at your institution. We don't know how to identify who the right people are, and we need to learn more about how we should be interacting at an institutional level, in addition to how we should be interacting at the level of the individual researcher who wants access to Strides. And so we're eager to hear from you about, what are the barriers to your access to the cloud, both within your institution and broadly. What are your barriers to doing good biomedical data science in the cloud? There are many things that we, in collaboration with our cloud service provider partners, can try to do to help. They are eager to figure out how to better tune their services for biomedicine and not just for big business. And so we want to have more conversations. We want to have more discussions like this with groups like this one, so that we can do a better job of helping the extramural research community reach the cloud. And I think that's I've got a bunch of backup slides in here, including maybe some potential discussion topics. And so I'll bring this slide deck up again. But before we do that, I want to switch over to my colleague, Jan Cheetham at the University of Wisconsin, who is going to provide that perspective of what it means to interact with Strides at an institution level. Jan, are your slides coming up okay?
Looks good. Yes. Thank you, Todd. And I'm just, excuse me, I'm just pasting it in chat, a link to a channel with some videos of some of our researchers talking about their cloud journeys. So we had a AWS Research Day back in January, and it was a full day event. And I would say for me, the best part was listening to a couple of our data scientists describe sort of their learning journey in the cloud, but I would say also the amazing architecture that they have built in the cloud. So I didn't include that in my slides, but I put a link to it just now in chat. Also pasted a link to it in the call document. So both of them, as I mentioned, are data scientists. One of them, Xuan Liu, sort of came to our university as a data scientist, seemed to have some pretty good cloud native skills. The other one, Kelsey Florick, was a graduate student here, got her degree and a position at our state hygiene lab, and apparently acquired some pretty amazing cloud skills along the way. So it was really interesting to hear about the architectures that they had built. And so the team that I work with provided some support to them. Our cloud vendors also provided support. And just with the support that we gave them and the skills that they picked up on their own, they both have built some very high, some very robust data and computing architectures that support the work of multiple PIs on campus in brain research on one hand with Xuan. So multi-omics, brain imaging, deep learning pipelines, and also on the side of Kelsey Florick, our state hygiene lab, building some data pipelines and visualization platforms for COVID data and other infectious disease data. And again, so I'll just go a little bit into how we've supported them. So I'm from the Central IT Unit, the Division of Information, or DO-IT, as we call ourselves. I lead a team of research cyber infrastructure specialists. We partner a lot with our cloud team and our cybersecurity team. The DO-IT is sort of the administrative home of our public cloud accounts. And so we partner quite a lot with other groups on campus. We have a substantial group in our School of Medicine and Public Health who operate cloud environments as well. So just a little bit of info on our infrastructure in DO-IT. So we have separate organizations on all three of the cloud providers for STRIDES, and some separated orgs also for restricted data. So I think between all three providers and all the different orgs we have about 12 different orgs under 3 different payer accounts for each of the 3 providers. We provide some infrastructure as code, including basic guardrails for security. We have helped a lot with building secure environments. And in the case of Shuang and Kelsey, both of those environments involved protected health information. So we did a lot to support them with risk assessments and sort of building in some integrations with our Cybersecurity Operations Center. We also partner quite a bit with departmental IT in creating some of this infrastructure. Todd, if you want to go to the next slide. Great. So another thing we're working on a lot is training and consulting. And so we've done some of the STRIDES specific training, I think about 3 years ago. There was some Google Cloud Platform training, so we've done some of that. But training is something we're always working on for our researchers, always sort of partnering closely with the cloud providers and just sort of testing to see what helps people learn. There's definitely a learning curve for getting those cloud skills, and some training we're finding kind of gets people over the hump. Sometimes it's kind of basic stuff. Sometimes people want a deep dive. I would say consulting on the part of the cloud team in my organization, and also with the vendors, with AWS and Azure and GCP has really made a difference, I think. So Todd, you were alluding to not running up a big bill, setting up sort of test environments. So I think that's been really helpful, especially with the 2 researchers that I mentioned, having a chance to build a little test environment and try things out. Building architectures that support data from multiple sources is always a challenge, especially when it needs to be secured. So a lot of consulting has gone into that. And I'd say the other thing that we offer drop-in sort of things just in time. So people can come to cloud office hours with questions about things. They can pick up like some Terraform skills for doing some of their own infrastructure building. And my last slide. And of course, there are the financial parts, which Todd alluded to. So as I mentioned, DO-IT is the home of the contracts. We luckily, when STRIDES came along, we already had contracts with with all 3 of the major vendors through the resellers that were part of STRIDES. And of course, since we're a state entity, we have to ensure that we have enough procurement authority in case people want to spend a lot in the cloud. So we work a lot on the contracts. We got the STRIDES amendments to all of our contracts. So we now have the STRIDES program set up on all 3 of the cloud providers. And the other thing that we've done as a campus to encourage researchers to use the cloud and to try to remove some of the financial barriers is we're doing a pilot, a 2-year pilot to reduce the facilities and administration. We're actually removing the facilities part of the overhead charges. So that's cut the charges in half for cloud computing. So far, so good. It isn't a huge administrative burden the way we've set it up. So we're really hoping that that will continue to make a difference. So I think the STRIDES discount in particular has been really a great inducement for people to try using the cloud. I think we've got a lot of people looking at setting things up in the cloud, but I think the challenging part really is the sort of learning curve and the testing things out and learning some new skills. So that's probably where we're putting a big part of our effort as an IT group right now.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for right now, and I have been ignoring the chat the whole time, but I think that we're at the point where maybe we can start doing some questions. And so I'll look to y'all to guide how we want to get into that.
Great. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Jan. Martin's been doing a really good job of sorting the questions in the call doc. So folks can take a look at that call doc. Martin, can I put you on the spot and others that have been monitoring the questions to see if there's some questions that have not been answered?
Sure. So we've Nick, a colleague of Todd's, has been pretty good in answering the questions in the chat, which I've been pasting in the call doc. So, but at the bottom of the call doc, there are a few questions that we haven't answered yet. Plus, there are a few new questions in the chat that I haven't managed to get onto the call doc yet. So maybe we can start with the last question from Henry. What is the level of discounts that the STRIDES provide? It looks like that's
right. So the first answer I'm going to give you is at a technical level, the discounts are proprietary to our 3 cloud service providers. They are eager to share that information with you. And if you email those, the CSP specific email addresses that I gave you, they will give you detail on the discounts. Having said that, and the discounts vary by CSP. They are generally between 9% and 25% off the list pricing. We have not done a side-by-side comparison of what you would pay for the same services on each of the 3 to compare dollar for dollar what's the discount. What I've heard from people, and this is by no means a scientific study, is that generally the discount works out to be about the same, regardless of what the actual percentage looks like. Jan, I don't know whether your experience is different from that.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I agree. I haven't done a deep financial comparison. And I think every little bit helps, but I don't always think that the financial barriers are the main thing. I think it's being able to sort of get your science in the cloud and have a reasonable time to science is mostly what I've gotten from our researchers.
all right. Let's see. So we got another question. Is kind of related to this? How does this work if you have other discounts through, for example, internet too? How can you find out where you get the best value?
Yeah, that's a little, how do you find out where you get the best value? I think you need to, reach out to the cloud service provider. You can, use their cost predictors and figure out what you can use their online services that you can plug in the services you want to use, and it'll tell you what the list pricing is. And then you can communicate with the cloud service provider, and they will explain to you what that cost will be under STRIDES. So you can get a dollar amount, and you can compare that to what you're paying on the internet too, or based on the discounts that you're getting institutionally. I will say that one challenge we have seen is at an institution level, if you have an agreement with a cloud service provider, the pricing that you pay, the discounts that you've negotiated are based on your what they expect that you will utilize, right? And so if you use STRIDES, the utilization under STRIDES doesn't count towards your institutional agreement with that cloud service provider. And so in some cases, and technically STRIDES discounts are only for your NIH funded investigators. And so that can be a barrier. I will say that our CSP partners have set precedents where they are willing to extend STRIDES discounts to an entire institution, regardless of whether or not an individual researcher is NIH funded or not. That decision is up to the cloud service provider. STRIDES, we're fine if they want to extend those discounts and include entire university. That's great. We don't mind at all.
Good. Another question here. Do you get any extra support from CSPs that you don't get if your institution has their own contract? I guess to rephrase this, does STRIDE provide some extra leverage on the support from CSP than one would get from their own institution's contract?
I'm going to first maybe look at Jan and ask, did you perceive a difference in the support you got before and after STRIDES?
No, I would say I don't. I mean, we've had STRIDES in place for a while, but I really feel like the CSPs are stepping up their game to support all researchers. And so it doesn't really matter if you're funded by NIH or doing biomedical research. They've just been providing really excellent support, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible depending on the agreement that you made, and this probably only applies to AWS because they do right now extend their level of enterprise support to extramural researchers. That may be a better deal, but that might be the only one. I agree with Jan. They are eager to get more involved in biomedical research, and we do see them like going out of their way to help.
All right. So
There's a question in the chat, Todd. Oh, sorry. I wanted to answer the one that I said earlier I would answer verbally, and then it came up again, right? So Rob asks, when I looked I2 pricing, so the Internet 2 Net Plus service terms was good on anything. STRIDES is good for NIH funded only. And I put in the chat, officially, yes, the STRIDES negotiated agreements and discounts apply to NIH funded investigators. However, we have partnered with Internet 2 so that you can, if you have an Internet 2 agreement, you can also benefit from and leverage STRIDES to get even greater discounts associated for your work. I'll say this, but it's not official. Multiple institutions have been able to work with the cloud providers to say, you know, we don't want to have to keep track of our NIH funded workloads versus our other research workloads and things. We would join the program if you could just let it all under the same roof. And I understand people have been successful in that, right? That's not something NIH has negotiated or intends to negotiate, because we're trying to enable our researchers and not overstep by doing more than what we can or should. But research institutions can further negotiate there to potentially extend those same STRIDES discounts to additional workloads. If that's helpful.
Yeah, so maybe let's move on. Tobin has a question here. We spend a lot of time talking about discounts, but what is the central thesis of STRIDES is more than that. So what's your elevator speech for the more?
Right, and I think the elevator speech for the more is the engagement, and this is something that we began in 2019 and 2020 that was derailed by COVID, and so we're getting back to how do we build community? How do we share practices? Inside of the NIH, we provide infrastructure for our researchers, and we provide direct support. We can't do that for all 27,000 NIH-funded investigators, but we can provide examples of how we approach it internally and help extend those examples. And I see Nick coming up with his hand as well.
Yeah, I love elevator speeches. So thanks for the great question, Tobin. I think the writing is on the wall that a lot of research and research computing is moving to the cloud. To the examples in the chat, not all of it, but NIH has made policies for data sharing and data management that funded investigators are now required to say how they're going to share and where and when. So what STRIDES really is a way to have some support structures in place as people are moving to the cloud to do it in a consistent way, to get some kind of community, to get some training, to not go at it on your own. So I think that's really what STRIDES is all about. And if we can give you discounts, right, to make that easier from a financial perspective, great. But we generally say, come for the discounts, stay for the extra benefits, right? And hopefully Jan was able to share some of the additional benefits. I heard her say that it's not really the financial part that's the hard piece. It's really figuring out, how do you do this? How do you reorient your kind of research support staff and your researchers themselves to be able to work in this new way using these new tools and capabilities? And that's what we hope to provide some enablement and support on to the degree that we can.
Great. Thank you so much, Nick. Thank you, Todd, and thank you, Jan, for your inputs today. It was a great conversation. We are at an hour and 54 minutes. Maybe I can hand this up to Annalie to wrap us up.
Sure thing. So I just will reiterate our thanks again to, I hope I catch everybody here, to Dr. Cheetham from Wisconsin, and also from STRIDES to Nick, Rachel, Todd, and Phil. And thank you so much. This was really a great presentation, good overview, lots of good questions asked. I'm sure there'll be more coming along, and lots of ongoing interest. To all the attendees, as always, this session has been recorded, and we will send an email out with the link to that recording as soon as we have it ready. Takes a little while to process, so give us a little moment. For next month, we are joining with the data facing track. So we will not be meeting at our usual Thursday 1 p.m. slot. It's 10 a.m. in Pacific time. Instead, we're aligning with their time slot, which is coming up, so a bit sooner. It'll be on Tuesday, April 2nd at the same time at 1 p.m. Eastern. And the topic will be the end of the limitless cloud. So I'll leave you hanging with that title, and hope that piques your curiosity so you can join us. So again, that's April 2nd. It's a Tuesday at 1 Eastern. Couple other just housekeeping things. If you do have suggestions for future calls, we're always open to hearing them. Share them by whatever means works. You can drop them in the call document. You can Slack us in the CaRCC space if you're on Slack, or reach out to any of us on the steering committee. Thanks again to the steering committee. Everyone was here capturing all of those great questions and answers, which will be in the call doc. So that was super. And especially to Justin and Tobin, our committee co-leads, and all of the people behind the scenes. So it was great to see everyone today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you on April 2nd.